Taking a look now at the news driving markets here in South Africa. Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan says a deal has been reached with other BRIC nations to establish a development bank that would rival Western-backed institution. Gordhan was speaking after meeting with his counterparts from Brazil, Russia, India and China in Durban. The bank is likely to focus on infrastructure financing, a direct challenge to 7 decades of dominance by the World Bank. We asked Minister Gordhan about the process that will be followed in implementing this bank.
The process is, firstly, you settle on a particular capital base, let's call it that. Secondly, some of it is paid up capital, some of it is called callable capital. Thirdly, you can pay up tomorrow morning or you can pay up over a period of time. Fourthly, you can then use whatever capital pool you have to borrow or leverage that capital. Some would leverage it 50 times, some would leverage it 200 times. So depending on what kind of credit rating this institution receives, that will determine the kind of money that it is able to leverage. And then ultimately, we are living in a world where there's a lot of surplus cash, particularly in the developed part of the world, that doesn't have sources or places where it can be invested profitably. Secondly, what that results in is short-term flows. So you want to move into a particular market, buy shares, for example, quickly make a big yield and then move out. It's this very rapid inward and outward flows over a short period that can be very destabilizing when it happens in large volumes, as it has happened in some parts of the world. What institutions like this institution and others offer is the opportunity to make 20 to 30-year investments. So you don't move in 6 months and move out, but you stay with a continent or with a region or with a country and invest over that longer term and make a commitment over the longer term to improve a logistics system or an energy system or whatever the case might be, and improve the potential of that country or that region's economy. And in that way, we minimize these rapid flows of capital and the negative impacts that those things can have.
Minister, what the issues were that people were talking about is also what is going to be the kind of say that each member country has, given the fact that we're coming off different bases. And of course, one wants to give equal voice to the various member countries. How have you scaled those kinds of hurdles in terms of the discussion? Is it in principle agreed that each member will have to bring an equal share?
There's a million questions when you set up institutions like this that you need to look at. And I think the leaders tomorrow will be able to give an indication of what have we progressed with and what are the issues that we still need to work on. And that will give both the public and yourselves an idea about where precisely we stand in these sort of journeys. It's a journey that we undertake.
I'm glad you used the word journey, because there's this expectation that if it will be declared and then it will be set up. And we know that development finance institutions don't work like that. Historically, if you look at different developing regions, these kinds of development finance institutions take quite a while to set up. What is the kind of issues that need to be resolved before one can kind of concretely talk about this institution getting on its feet?
But it's not just about the institution. A bloc like Brics is only 5 years young, so to speak. How long did the EU take to become the EU? And after 50 odd years, it still finds itself in all sorts of trouble. It still sees the need to build new institutions which are largely experimental and deal with all sorts of crises. Similarly, there are trade blocs like Mercosur and others elsewhere. There's the G7, each of which are decades-long journeys and processes. And I think the BRICS formation and whatever institutions it gives rise to is precisely that kind of journey. And lots of details have to be resolved, whether it's trade issues or finance issues at the end of the day.
Now,
but the key is we remain very positive and very optimistic about the outcomes of this summit.
Now, of course, development finance institutions is, in many cases, the key to the kind of infrastructure rollouts that many of these countries have embarked on. Africa is busy with its own infrastructure rollout plan. Is it hoped that discussing these kinds of mechanisms will give impetus to the kind of finance and capital that needs to be raised to match the kind of political ambitions that African leaders have and emerging economy leaders have?
But that's the whole idea, that BRICS represents, and together with the African continent, a huge demand for infrastructure investment, and we need to find the supply. And that supply can come from a country's own resources, a group of countries' resources or international resources, as I was pointing out earlier on. And the idea is how do we match, if you like, demand and supply? And how do we create products and processes that will reassure people to invest on the African continent or any particular Brics country and still get an adequate return, and we have the benefit of the investment that they actually make.
Now, in geopolitical terms, Minister, many people see the creation of this bank, whenever it is in fact up and running, as a counterpoint to your big finance institutions in the world, your World Bank, your International Monetary Fund. Is that the thinking of the political actors in Brics?
No, we don't see ourselves in competition with anybody, because we are all members of the World Bank, we are all members of the IMF. Each of us also belong to regional formations of one kind or another. We are members of and part of the African Development Bank. And all we are saying here is create, if we can, a new institution which might have new mobilizing capabilities in terms of finances, and work with the old institutions as well. Because your demand is still high and your supply is still inadequate, notwithstanding the presence of those institutions. Now, clearly there will be some geopolitical implications, because you're not working within a World Bank or IMF framework that was essentially created post-World War II. It has had some mutations since then, but nothing significant at the end of the day. For example, Africa still has only 2 chairs around the table in the IMF, whereas we have 3 in the World Bank. And it's an area that we are canvassing support for, where we believe a 3rd chair needs to be created for Africa. And certainly, as much as possible, South Africa itself needs a voice around the table.